My name's Richard. I am a licensed professional counselor and licensed music therapist in the state of Oregon. So I come out here for this. I got my degree in music therapy and counseling psychology at Drexel University, just right over in Philadelphia, not too far from here. So I was a native of Philly for a little while and then moved clear out to Oregon to become a trauma specialist out there. The CAPT at the end of my name there stands for Child and Adolescent Trauma Professional. I have a private practice. I work in outpatient predominantly with younger children and adolescents, but do a fair amount of family therapy as well. Most of my clients, you can tell, being the background of trauma, do have some sort of trauma background to them, but I would say with my music therapy background, I get a lot of the neurodivergent community, so I get a lot of autism, a lot of ADHD, and other things that come through it, but now I get kind of the mixed bag. I get the kids with autism and trauma, the kids with ADHD and trauma. So kind of complex cases. A lot of these cases I work with, I'll be with them for a year, 2 years sometimes, working through social skills as well as how to deal with what happened to you kind of stuff. I'm also the co-developer of a tabletop role-playing game called Legends of Lorem, shameless plug, with my beautiful artificer of a wife, Janae Stubbs, who got her MOM about a year and a half after we got married. She's a physicist and all-around hottie. She would have been here if she could, but we just didn't have any way to get our whole family out here because we homeschool, so she's the teacher as well as mom. So she sends her love to you. She's all one of our coworkers. We're going to talk a little bit about my game today, not in a advertisement sort of way, but just as an example of how you could use tabletop role-playing games. I've been using tabletop role-playing games, especially the one that I've been developing here in the last 7 years in my private practice. I thought I was being really original. I had this brilliant idea of using D&D in therapy. I thought, no one's ever done this. And as soon as you do your research, you find there's people who've been doing it for 20 years. And you go, oh, okay, cool. I'll go learn from them. And Jack's been really cool to let me pick his brain through lots of emails, Zoom calls, and other things. So I've learned a lot through him, and I've learned through other people as well. And hopefully I can get that. Just by interest, I also kind of have the aspect I'm a rock climber, I'm a photographer, and I'm a geek about both those things. Obviously, I brought the photography into it as well. What I love here is I've got some of these things here. We all identify in many ways, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today, in terms of what we are, who we are, what we do. We define ourselves in many, many ways. That's the roles we take upon ourselves. And I think it differs from context to context, and it can differ by who's in the room with us. And I love what I've seen so far today. In fact, the one, Mike up here at the front, he wrote down cleric and bard, which is exactly what I put down. So I thought, okay, we're pretty akin here. It's fun to think that way. I identify as a bard because I tell stories for a living. I get paid to tell stories, but I also do it as a cleric because I'm a therapist and I work with people to help them heal. So it's a great way to look at it. Kyle put down a learner. I love that. Dan, we have teacher. Chad put father, husband, paladin. Fantastic. Austin, ranger. Let's see, we got Jack. He's not in here right now. He's in the other room. He put down fixer and caretaker. And then D, if we put down navigator, which I love that. Navigator's a great title for that. So these are just some of those roles, and I like kind of seeing how that pops out here. I want to kind of look at the roles that people take on in a group dynamic in more specific focus today in a therapeutic context. How many of you here are therapists or work in a group therapy setting or some sort of group working kind of environment? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then teacher, do you do group work with your students? Well, yeah. Okay. What do you? All the time. That's true. Yeah. Now what do you teach? You do what? I teach 5th grade. 5th grade. Okay. So not like special ed or anything. It's just straight up 5th grade classes.
I have special ed students. I don't have self-contained.
Yep.
So it's special ed classes, and then I also have a after-school group that I run. I use Savage systems.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, this will totally be applicable to you too. So this is not. The stuff we're going to talk about here, like don't feel like you have to have a degree or a license in therapy to practice. This is just basic group dynamic kind of stuff, and it will come true whether you're playing at home with your friends or whether you're playing with a big group of kids that you're trying to help teach social skills to. Kind of an agenda. Our first little bit, we're going to go a little bit over why we use TRPGs, a little bit of the history behind them, not super in depth. I'm assuming most of you are pretty familiar with some of this stuff. If there's big questions, you can let me know. And then we're going to talk about the role-playing positives and role-playing challenges that come with group dynamics specifically. And then if we have some time at the end, I'll give you some questions. So this is the boring slide. You can tell because there's not any pictures on it. Why do we use TRPGs? So if we think about TRPGs, like we've all talked about this all day long already, but let's just shoot some out there. What are some of the reasons we use TRPGs? Maybe it's the reasons you love using them. You can use ones on the board if you want. But
see themselves as a hero.
Lets the kids see themselves as hero. What else? What else do you use them?
Because it's safer than real life.
Yeah, totally safer than real life. I have definitely experienced that. I don't go out and fight dragons in real life. What else? Yeah, totally a bit of fantasy escapism. There's nothing wrong with a little bit of escape in your life. In fact, escapes can be good if they're not overused, right? Wonderful. Anything else?
Aesthetic distance. It's easier to see somebody else solving a problem than you doing it yourself. So
Lovely.
you can separate.
That
It's not you, it's your character.
That was a great phrase. I've never used aesthetic distance until this morning from that first class. I like that.
I got that from the Adams.
I'm going to take that again. I like it. I think it's great. And aesthetic distance is great. Some of the other ones here, you got social interaction we've talked about, obviously, problem solving, creativity boosting. It develops emotional intelligence. That's like empathy and perspective taking, all those kinds of things, right? We have risk and rewards, the idea of the safe space to try things that we normally probably wouldn't try. And this might be in the roles that we take on ourselves or even just in the actions that we take as a person. It improves narration and storytelling skills, which is important in many ways, whether you're giving a presentation at a conference or whether you're talking to your family and friends or giving a report to a supervisor at work, whatever it may be. Real-time feedback is a big part of this because we learn best when we burn our hands on the stove. So this gives us a hot. It's kind of a fun way. I have parents ask me all the time, well, do you let the kids do whatever they want? I'm like, yeah, they do. And like, well, that sounds bad. What if they go drinking? I'm like, well, then they get a hangover. Oh. What happens if they rob a bank? Well, they go to jail. Oh, like there's consequences in the game. I'm not going to just like let you go out and like murder peasants wholeheartedly without having the city watch show up and slaughter you. Like that's going to happen. Like, and that's part of that real life feedback. And we're going to give a real example of that with some of our things here today. The adaptability, players have to react to new and unexpected situations, and this is huge in the mental health world. Cognitive flexibility. Goal setting and achievement, that's really important. So we've talked, you've probably heard this before, you'll hear it a bunch. When you go into groups and things, you really want to have goals. You have something in mind. We're not just there to play a game. It's fun that we're playing a game, but that's not the reason we're there. It's the vehicle, it's the medium. Okay, where has role-playing been used? This is what's kind of fun. I like to think about tabletop role-playing outside of Dungeons & Dragons and its history. One of the most famous examples I can think of is wargaming, especially during World War II. You had a whole group of women in Britain called the Waves. They worked for the Department of the Navy, and they were tasked with destroying the British Navy. That was their job. And they played a role-playing game with all of the admirals and generals and people they could think of that ran the actual real military, the guys who were making the real decisions. They would run simulations using a giant board game set, essentially just a big fake ocean grid system. And they had a whole bunch of rules set up that would help them determine, factors in real life to simulate as real as possible. And these women wreaked havoc on Britain's economy for months. They went in as the German U-boats and did exactly what Hitler was doing, and they basically just destroyed England over and over and over. And they themselves started to develop tactics for how to stop themselves from winning this war. And they taught all these big British admirals and guys that have been studying warfare for their whole lives, these women who've been brought in as young women, they're probably in their 20s or so, and taught them how to save Britain. And they developed a convoy system. They developed a whole way of getting across the Atlantic to bring needed materials from the United States over to Britain that basically saved Britain and helped them figure out how to hunt U-boats in a very effective manner. And this is all happening before they even found the Enigma device, if you're familiar with that, and cracked the German code. So this is pretty terrible stuff that it was used for. This was life and death situation, and they're using a role-playing game. Billion-dollar business deals use role-playing all the time. You'll come in and you'll think, okay, we got to negotiate the sale of our company or the buying of another company. I want you to play the part of the other person buying. I'm going to play the part of this. We're going to have our discussion, role-play how this would go, and then we're going to swap. I'm going to play you, you play me. And we go back and forth. And you do this so that you can A, get really good at asking the right questions, figuring out what pitfalls could happen in a big billion-dollar business deal like this. They use role-playing all the time. They would call it business, but it's still just a game. You're just playing around. You're pretending to be someone else. Diplomatic peace negotiations or hostage negotiations or any kind of negotiation whatsoever. Have you ever been with a 3-year-old? Yeah, that's reality. And that's something that they use all the time. Again, just role-playing or trying to pretend to be someone else is a very useful functional skill. So what are the challenges we face as running tabletop role-playing in groups? You got group dynamics. There's overwhelm because it's a lot to manage. You're running a story. You've got all the parts and pieces that come with that, all of the imaginations that come with that, and you've got boundary setting. and you've got the diverse needs of the different treatment plans or school plans or IEPs in the case of school, right, that you have to address in the meantime. All of that together makes this an immensely complex form of therapy or education, and it's not something you just jump into, right? You really do need to go into it with your eyes open. But if you pull all it together, you can roll your critical success, right? You can get your D20 out and roll a 20 almost every time. Because when you understand how that works, you learn how to avoid the big pitfalls of the challenges. You learn how to address them. So what do we do about the challenges? We establish ground rules. We ensure that every player has a chance to interact. You have routines. You provide structure with the interactions. I say, I love what was said this morning, like, don't feel like you have to just like be religious about specific game mechanics or brands or whatever it may be. Simplify where necessary, adapt, change, homebrew it, make it yours that will work in that environment the best possible way. There are plenty of people who are designing games that they feel like work for therapy. I've done that myself, I've been doing that. But the reality is, I still tell people if they use my game in therapy, you're gonna adapt and use it in different ways. You're gonna break the rules that I wrote because it's gonna be different wherever you go. So that's a big part of it. Pre-planning the sessions with a clear idea of how much time you need for each session with the story and being ready to adapt as the players interact. I mean, this is role play. Anything goes, guys. Like, how many of you have played the role of DM, GM, storyteller? Most of you? Okay. Have you ever had the player like that just like you have like hours of prep and the player comes in and destroys all of it in like 2 seconds? Right? Or sees right through your brilliant puzzle that you had and suddenly you're going, well, crap. I don't know what to do now, right? And that happens all the time. I remember the first few times I learned how to DM, that was always the big problem. I'd spend hours preparing and then someone would come in and just rip it to shreds. They'd be like, okay, well, I got to figure that one out. So I've actually gotten really good at just improvising stories in a lot of ways or learning to incorporate what they're doing in the story. That's a big part of it. So yeah, exactly. So then you have conduct initial assessments when possible to determine the types of adaptations you may need for the group. I really don't ever think anyone should ever have a cold group. You should never go into a group not knowing who your players are and what their needs are. That is the epitome of bad work. You don't know what's going to come up, and you don't know who's going to get triggered, you don't know what's going to happen. You could have chaos. I say this because I made that mistake very early on in these role-playing game groups. I had a young group of people, and I had a bunch of other therapists that were vetting their clients and said, hey, we really want to send them to your group. I said, great. I just kind of assumed they knew that their client was ready for group. So I looked at the treatment plans, like, okay, that fits with what we're trying to accomplish. I thought, okay, I've done my prep work, right? I'd never met the kid, never once. And we had this group of, I think we had 7, 8, 9, and 10-year-olds, right? And within that first session, I had a chair thrown across the room and 3 kids in tears. So prep beforehand, right? And it's because there was one kid in the group who the therapist had said, oh yeah, he needs good group social skills, had failed to mention in her notes or plan or anywhere that this kid was really a button pusher, like loved to harm people. The only kid I think I've ever run into that I genuinely gave a diagnosis of oppositional defiant disorder, like a genuine, real diagnosis, if you're familiar with DSM, like this is someone who actually met that criteria because they really enjoyed hurting others. Not a good mix for this kind of gaming, right? So I've learned that lesson the hard way. I hope you guys never have to do that. Having a session 0, we talked more about that, is also very important. Make sure your game players are prepped and understand how the game's going to run. What roles do the players play? So these are the player roles. We think about the roles that their characters run. So they run a character. That could be, if you're playing D&D, your ranger, your fighter, your mage, your warlock, your rogue, your druid, whatever it may be, right? Then they have the roles that they feel apply to them in real life. That's kind of what I have like here, right? Some of you kind of put down some of those real life roles. Some of you put down the fictional roles. And then you have the roles that you assume in response to group dynamics. Those are your 3 basic versions of roles, as I like to think about it. So whenever you're role playing, you have to keep the context of what's the character doing? So this is perspective taking of my character. What do I feel like how do I respond to that character or to other real life things? And then thirdly, how do I assume that role in response to everyone else around the table? Do I have a lot of quiet people? So does that mean I talk too much? Maybe I need to be more quiet so that people can talk? Like, what role am I taking in response to everyone else? You're going to have this in your head throughout every group, kind of looking at kids, assessing where they're sitting and how they're navigating these. I have started to label roles that I've seen in my group, and I've kind of labeled them as your positive player roles and your challenging player roles. We'll go over the positives first. The first ones here are the helper, the informer, the harmonizer, the energizer, and the leader. Okay? These are these are interesting little challenges that you can run into, or these, interesting groups that you can run into. Each of them have benefits and downsides. So the helper, I would say that these people typically fall under the lawful good or lawful neutral kind of quality. They're out for the best in other people. They want to see improvement in other people around them. They like helping. In general, this is the members who seek not only to help each other, but the guide, or I call the game master the guide or the storyteller, as well. And the helper often comes before the group and sets up. They stay after. They help clean up. During the sessions, the players who adopt the helper role will be focused on the needs of others. They exhibit a high level of empathy and concern for the challenges faced by other NPCs. Ideally, you'll see many of your players adopt this role. Now, let me kind of tell you a little bit about the game that I run. And I hope that as you're playing other games and stuff, I hope you guys will stop by and try it. I'd love to get some feedback from professionals on how this game works. But in our game, Legends of Lauren, we have a process for how we approach the therapy aspect of it. You think about the characters they're developing, how group dynamics work, and then I think of the structure of the group itself. And I often think of group in phases. You have discussion phase, planning phase, and action phase. Those are the three things I think of. Your discussion phase and planning phase are probably the most common phases you're going to run into a lot, because it's where we're talking about a problem, planning for how to deal with the problem, talking about what we did this week, planning what we're going to do next week, all these kinds of things that come in those phases. And they go in and out of these phases many times in a single session of play. Typically speaking, most group therapies are around an hour and a half to 2 hours. And you want to keep that in mind too as you try to run these phases. Action phase is like things done in the game. So I might be picking a pocket, picking a lock, picking my nose, whatever it may be, or fighting a battle. We're doing these different things within the group itself to try and kind of launch, how do I put it? From the planning stage into the completion stage, if you will. Like the action is launching the plans, it's launching the discussion. And very often we want to keep our eyes on if they acted according to their plan, or did the plan go how they thought it would, or did they come in with these challenging thoughts of hey, I really expected that to turn out differently and it didn't. We can stop and have a discussion phase where it's well, why don't you think it worked out the way you thought it would? What could have gone better this time? I'd say one of the most common things I run into is the subversion of their expectations. People come in, they say, we're going to do this thing and then this will happen. And they'll even directly say, I'm going to run forward and I'm going to use my sword and I'm going to lop off his head and he'll die and bleed to death on the ground. I was like, we'll see if that happens. You have to roll your dice first. There's an aspect of rolling the dice that's important to the whole story too. We want to role play, but we also want to do some rolling. And that helps them kind of come up with this idea of okay, I had this plan, it didn't work. Why didn't it work? Couldn't have a chance, maybe you weren't prepared enough, maybe it was a much tougher enemy than you realized. Whatever may have happened, you have to change your expectations here. And so the helper, when they see these kinds of things coming up in group, they're the one that's going to instantly try to solve and fix and sort and assist. They might be the kind of people that naturally lead toward the D&D roles of cleric or paladin, right? These healing type and defending type characters. They don't have to always be demure, quiet people. Helpers can be loud, proud, and just as exuberant as anyone else in the room, but their goal is really focusing on other people. The possible challenges here is you have to keep in mind that when people adapt this role, they might be avoiding taking help from other people. They might be avoiding talking about their own problems or focusing on their own issues. So someone who is very good at noticing everyone else in the room but never talks about themselves, might be someone who needs to do a little bit more self-reflecting. Might be someone who needs to say, hey, what have you been doing this week? What's going on with you? What challenges are you facing? We want to support you as well. Helpers burn themselves out a lot, right? Therapists often fall in this category of helper. They get burned out. You get the caregiver fatigue. Teachers get caught in this one a lot too, actually. This is a thing. So when you look at it, you have to redirect these helpers to help them self-examine and to explore why they're helping or what they're doing to help other people. Some helpers may use, I'm reading my slide, I'm ready to roll, may use helping in a passive-aggressive way to address concerns or problems with others. So passive-aggressive helping is an interesting problem that can occur. That's where it's I'm going to solve this problem for you. And that person's I don't think it's a problem. Oh, are you sure? I think it's a problem. I'm going to help you with that problem, right? This is I'm coming in to solve something that I think is a problem, even though no one else thinks it's a problem. And it can be pretty subtle. Sometimes you have to watch out for that passive-aggressive thing. And notice the dynamics of the group. When you see someone react poorly to the help of another person, hey, so-and-so tried to help you with that, and I noticed you're not reacting well to that. That seemed to bother you. What's going on there? And like, well, I didn't want help with that. I wanted to do it myself. Oh, right. So what could be better next time? Maybe you should ask before you just jump in and help. Oh, right. Well, can we reframe how we say that? That might be it. Like, there's a lot of things we can do here, right? So when we're looking at the way the helper comes in, it's also good to help give them that boundary of saying, always offer help before just jumping in to give help. You need to offer, say, hey, this is what I'd like you to help. Is that okay with you? That's like, I tell my clients, like, you're like the paramedic. A paramedic doesn't just show up at the scene and start patching someone up. They show up and they say, hey, I'm so-and-so, I'm a trained paramedic, can I help you? And then I had a client, I gave that description one time, the client asked me, well, what happens if they say no? The paramedic stands there and waits until that person passes out. And then it's implied consent, then you can help. Like, is that real? Like, yeah, that's real. And that's the value, right? Sometimes you just sit back and let people make mistakes. And helpers have a hard time letting others make mistakes. They really struggle with the group making mistakes. And so helpers can sometimes get into a I told you so kind of mentality. I told you it was going to happen that way. You guys didn't listen to me. If you'd done what I said, we would have avoided the problem. Helpers can jump into that problem sometimes. So you have to kind of think of it that way. Next up is the informer. The informer role is someone who comes in to provide group cohesion and keep the group informed and on the same track. Informers are really useful people to have when you have distracted people in the room, because informers really are energized by helping others stay on track. Like, this is a positive thing for them too. Like, they don't just inform because they're trying to know-it-all. They just enjoy bringing people into the world with them. Informers are some of your best role players too. They are the ones that just adore coming in and like getting into the depth of a character and understanding the backstory more. They want to understand the motivations of the bad guy and why it is that the werewolves are doing what they're doing or whatever it may be. They really love that aspect of things. Informers are really great role players. They're also very good at the beginning and ends of sessions to help you kind of like summarize what happened and summarize, what actions were taken, and kind of they help you keep that discussion phase going well. What are the natural consequences you can think of? So you see what it's called, like, what are some of the challenges that might come in terms of an informer? What do you guys see, potentially?
Their own bias or the way they see things being that's the reality.
Yeah, the bias is definitely playing into it. They might emphasize different points that other people didn't notice or wouldn't want to talk about either, or didn't think were as important. Definitely bias could be in there. What else? What are some of the natural challenges of the informer?
They love backstory that you slowly gain down.
Yes, backstory can absolutely slow down. It's, let me tell you all about my character and how it's like tragic happened to him and this, all this, that, and blah, 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 and everyone at the table goes, or all zoning out and get lost. So that they can get a little too informative sometimes. Absolutely. What else? You got one percolating there, Keith. I can see it.
Well, too much information. Your information also creates frameworks. It's restrictive or things like that. It's also directed.
Yeah, sometimes you can get too boxed in. Informers do tend to be kind of in a box. That's a good observation. Yeah.
Sometimes they're just flat out wrong.
Yeah.
In their recollection of information, maybe not willfully or intentionally, but
Yeah.
when you're trying to recall that one key thing from 3-4 sessions ago, and their recollection isn't quite right, they got it written down in your notes, you're like, no, that's not how it went.
Exactly.
Especially when it's important to a puzzle or the narrative or something like that, really
Yeah.
can screw things up.
They can, and that's where bias can come in sometimes too. Well, I remember when I saved everyone. Well, that's not exactly how we saw it. Right? Like, that's not exactly true. Or, they don't listen very carefully. Like, informer doesn't mean good listener. It just means they like sharing the information. Sometimes your informers are your worst listeners. That happens all the time with some of my ADHD clients. I'm one of those. Where you're just excited about certain things. And so you inform everyone about everything you noticed, but you missed all the really important information that everyone else is maybe aware of, or maybe they weren't aware of, and now everyone's kind of lost, right? Sometimes the therapist or the storyteller has to be the informer. Sometimes in fact, that's very often the role of the game master is the informer. I'm informing you what the story is, what's going to happen in response to your choices and decisions. So other possible challenges, the informer can take the role too far, using their knowledge to shame or guilt other players into playing the right way, like that framing kind of aspect of things. You can often see problems with the informer. They begin their statements, well, actually, or if you read the rules, you'd see, or you're wrong, this is what actually happened, right? Informers can be a bit blunt sometimes, and that happens, right? So if you ever see someone adjusting their glasses and saying, well, actually, you can say, well, pause. let's think carefully what you're going to say here next. Next up is the harmonizer. I think of the that totally wrong. Or that's just a weird looking T. Neutral. That's a weird looking T. Okay. The harmonizer is a true neutral. Okay. The harmonizer is really this quality, this person who is avoiding conflict at all costs. The harmonizer does not like conflict. But they can also be really good when it comes to the fact that invariably group therapy has ups and downs, right? There is times where players don't see eye to eye. There's times where one wants to do another thing when someone else wants to do something different. There's times when everyone's discussing and someone just wants to get to the action. I'm so bored with the plan. Can we finally go kill some monsters? This is stupid, right? Like this happens in group all the time. The harmonizer is someone who's usually pretty good at watching the group. They're going to pay attention. They're a little different than the helper. The helper's out there actively trying to solve problems. The harmonizer is going to sit back, and if they start to see that there's conflict rising, they're going to try to soothe specifically those conflicts. They're not trying to help everything. They're really more about group cohesion. That's kind of their hope, is that, hey guys, let's all get along. We're all here to play together, right? The harmonizer seeks to dispel tension caused by events. And they can use this in many ways. They can use humor. They can use like problem-solving skills, kind of like the helper would do. They can use strategy. They use self-sacrifice a lot of times. Well, why don't you just take mine, right? Everyone's arguing about who's going to pay for the inn tonight. We're all coming into the inn, and the innkeeper says it's 5 silver per room. I'm not going to pay that. That's outrageous. The harmonizer might say, that's okay, I'll pay for it. And they end up harming themselves. Now, that's also one of those downfalls, right? You're seeing immediately harmonizer can be pretty self-sacrificing and we leave those possible challenges. So they're default conflict avoidant, which is, it's okay to let conflict happen, right? We can't have a good story without conflict, first and foremost. And frankly, relationships need conflict too. And I'm not saying you have to have fights to be in a good relationship. I'm just saying you have to have disagreements. You have to not always see eye to eye, because how else do you polish a relationship? How else do you learn that the other person is much deeper and richer than you thought even possible? And the fact of the matter is I've been married for 15 years, and the wife I know now is so different than the wife I married 15 years ago. And frankly, I feel like I've only just scraped the surface of who she is as a person. I know her very well. This is a person I know better than anyone else in the world. And part of that is we don't always see eye to eye. And I'm having an experience in the world, and she's having an experience in the world. And even though we spent 15 years experiencing the world together, we're having our own experience of the world. And so it's a lot of interesting conflicts that come. My wife and I would say we've never really had a fight, at least not one that I've won. And really, like, it's an important part of that group, that marriage cohesion for us is we have that conflict to help build our story. And conflict sometimes is us versus the conflict. It's not always, we disagree on this. It's a, wow, we're looking at the bills this month. We don't know how to pay them. What do we do? Okay, we're gonna have that conflict solved with us together. It might be, wow, our 7-year-old will not sleep in her own room. What do we do about that? Okay, we're gonna have a conflict with the resolution around that. Harmonizers. My wife is a harmonizer. I use her as an example here because she's not here, so she can't tell you all my problems. I'm just kidding. No, my wife is a harmonizer, and she's one of those ones that would fall into this category of minimizing or ignoring or placating a negative feeling, mostly of her own. She is good at understanding everyone else's, but her own don't matter. And harmonizers can do this. You've probably seen it when people are like, oh, it's okay, I don't really need it, it's okay. And like you can tell they totally care, but they're going to take the hit for the team, right? The harmonizer very often will make sure everyone else is happy before they even think about their own, and then they might not have enough energy to think about their own needs in that moment, right? Moms and dads fall into the category of harmonizers all the time. They're just trying to get the kids to calm down and be quiet so we can survive the rest of the car trip. Teachers probably fall into this quite often. We've got a whole room of 30 kids. Sometimes you're just like, okay, everyone, we're going to take a 10-minute break outside. Let's go. Like, or you wish you could do that. I mean, you probably always like that. Like, there's this thing. Sometimes you just have to dispel the conflict because you just can't deal with it anymore. And that's okay. It's not bad to have a harmonizer. They are useful people. But they have some pretty backgrounds. Questions? Comments? Snyder marks? Okay. Next one up here is the energizer. I like to think of this one as the chaotic good person. Energizers, I think, this is going to be someone who's similar to a negative role or a challenging role we'll talk about later called the spotlight seeker. But energizers are different in the sense that they're not really looking for spotlight, but they are trying to look for action. These are your kids who love the action phase of group, don't particularly love your dialogue and discussion, and very often are not your best role players. Energizers, I mean, they might like role play where it involves a lot of funny banter and goofing around and joke telling and all that kind of stuff. But they're typically the people that want to jump into action. I want to go explore a dungeon. I want to go and rob the bank. I want to go and save the princess. I want to go and fight the monster, whatever it may be. That's part of the story. They want to be part of this. They just want to keep push. They're excited about that stuff, which is great because if you have someone who's a long informer, right, and is like backstory, the energizer goes, okay, cool, let's move on, and they can get everyone going. And they're generally pretty good at getting people to move on, right? We look at positive aspects. They are great. Their social, their emotional skills may also be really good at this point. Like, these are pretty empathetic people. They're good at kind of reading the room, your energizers, typically. And I would say a lot of my clients with ADHD are energizers. And I'm not just saying that because of hyperactivity. I'm saying that because people with ADHD are pattern recognizers. They recognize patterns very quickly. And so they learn to read the room fast. They learn to read people fast. They learn to say, oh, you're motivated by that. You're motivated by that. Let's get those things involved because then we're all motivated and happy. And it's really fun. And they're really like, let's keep this stimulating and engaging. I want the environment to be stimulating. So energizers are great for a lot of reasons. You need to have energizers in the group, but too many energizers and you'll have chaos. I mean, just utter chaos. I have a young group I'm working with right now of 9, 10, 11-year-olds. I have 3 energizers in that group. And they're great kids. They are friendly, sweet boys, but man, they do not like slow action. They want action. One of them is very story-oriented. He wants to move the story along. One of them is just character-oriented. I want to get my character upgraded. And so they have very different goals. And so they push the energy in 5 different directions, even though there's only 3 of them. And it can be absolutely chaotic. So sometimes you have to like really work with these energizers to kind of pull them back. So obviously we're talking about the downsides of the energizer. The downsides of the energizer are, you know, they can be a hindrance or help, right? But while they inspire interactions with most of the isolated groups, they'll pull those in. Sometimes they can also run over those isolated players. The ones who are a little more quiet and reserved, the energizers might walk right over the top of them and not even notice. So even though I'm saying sometimes they're good at recognizing people and patterns, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they say, well, if he wanted to speak up, he would speak up. Stop being so quiet, Bob. You know, speak up. And that's kind of the way it is. They're not typically your quiet people, and so they don't understand introspective kind of people or introverted kind of people very often. They often dominate conversations. They can be averse to slower pace, like I said, and a big challenge also is they often avoid the role play. So they don't like slow dialogue-oriented kind of things, and they don't feel connected in the same way that someone else, like an informer, might in terms of role play. That might not be where they feel the most connection. Now, we're not trying to turn energizers into good role players all the time, although we want to help them see the benefit of good role play, right? How exciting that can be in many ways. The leader. So the leader in a group, this is anyone who takes a leadership role at any point. Very often, you're going to have this role bounce around the room. And if you're good at storytelling, if you're good as the dungeon master, whatever it may be, you're good at helping people adapt to creating this leadership opportunity. So it might be like, oh, your character has a special skill. I'm going to create a situation where your character has to take the lead in developing that skill or using that skill, right? So the leader is a role, not a title. It's just a role that we take off and on often. And the players who take the leadership role, they experience very rewarding connections with other players and very rewarding connections with the game. So we want everyone to have as many opportunities to be a leader in the group as possible. Right? Leaders, they have that moment to kind of shine and excel and feel that confidence boost, that built of self-efficacy that can come with, you know, bringing a team through a challenge. And so it's a really important role to have. They're really not concerned about being the center of attention per se. Like, we're not looking for someone who's just trying to get attention. We're looking for someone who's bringing everyone else. They might demand attention from them. Hey, everyone, I really have a good plan here. We need to listen to this, right? But then they're going to say, I think you have this skill, you have this skill, you have that skill. If we use those skills, we can do this thing, right? And they can really bring a team together. They're team-oriented kind of thinkers, not self-oriented kind of thinkers. Challenges with leaders, sometimes they have that strong investment in the story. It can be a double-edged sword, right? They lack the ability to be flexible very often. Some of your leader types that are very often taking this leadership role, they can kind of say, well, it has to be done this way, right? There's no other way to solve that problem. Well, are you sure? No, there isn't. There can't be. I don't see it. I think very black and white on some things. That strict following of the rules can also be a challenge, or it cuts a little bit of the joy out of it. Well, you can't roll for that. That doesn't make sense, right? Why would you use a dexterity roll on that instead of perception? Well, we're just playing around here. It's all made up of pretend. So sometimes you have to just realize we're going to adapt and change. It's fine. Right? Leaders, sometimes the ones that are kind of falling into the challenging parts of leadership, they'll challenge the storytelling. Why did you do it that way? That doesn't make sense. Like, you get that out there. Because they want things to make sense. Generally speaking, leaders are pretty pragmatic people in this regard, or when they're in that leadership role. Okay? Other thoughts you can think of that might be challenges for leader types? That maybe you've seen in your own groups?
Situations where maybe they're not the leaders.
Yeah. So being able to share that leadership with other people? Totally. Any other thoughts?
If you're into like reluctant leaders, where like you notice they're clearly the leader, and the whole table notices they're clearly the leader, and everyone's like, "What do you think we should do, James?" And James is like, "Why are you asking me?" They're like, "You're." I think it comes into it because like you're in charge. I'm like, I'm not in charge.
Yeah.
So I think this kind of language you can also help take into like say like, no, you're not in charge. No one's in charge, but
Yeah.
you're clearly helping keep people focused.
You're clearly leading the group right now, or you clearly have the most expertise in this situation. We need you to step into that role. And you don't want. I love that idea of the reluctant leader. That's a really good example. That comes up often, especially with my anxious clients. Right? They have a great idea, but they just don't share it. So sometimes you have to pause and be like, I can tell you're thinking about this. Like, you can see them. They're usually kind of squirming in their chair, like everyone's debating these plans, and you can see them just like they're just really percolating, and you might have to just pause and be like, okay, Donovan, tell me, what are you seeing there? I can tell your brain's working on overdrive, man. Well, I have this idea, but I don't think anyone's going to like it. Well, I think you should try anyway. Let's just see what people think, right? So that happens a lot. So that's a really good example. Thanks so much, Austin. All right. So before we go on to challenging rules, let's talk about this. So any other questions about the positive rules so far? Any thoughts or concerns or things that came up as we talked about those? Okay. So we're going to go to our challenging player rules. Now, when I describe challenging player rules, so you notice like with each of the positives, we also talk about the challenges with those positives, right? They're not all perfect positives, right? The same is sort of true of these, but these are generally speaking much more detrimental than helpful, right? So it's like imagine any of our good roles, and we've got nothing but the bad sides of those good roles that they've taken on, right? So like we're going to look at kind of what happens when it goes wrong, as it were. And you're going to see a lot of these. It comes up in different ways. And I've got some different examples to go over of how these occur and then what we can do about them. This is kind of the most important part. So how do we handle this kind of dynamic? So first up is our spotlight seeker. Okay. Let's have someone read this for me who wouldn't mind. Someone want to volunteer to read something? Can you read it? Okay. Want to go for it, Kat?
Spotlight seekers often pose the greatest threat to group cohesion. These players seek to have the attention of the whole group. They have limited tolerance for play or imagination unless it is according to their preferred planner style. Spotlight seekers prefer to have others empathize with them and have great difficulty empathizing with others. Spotlight seekers will actively derail group proceedings if events do not fall in their favor or allow them to receive sufficient attention.
So when we think about the spotlight seeker, you want to think of someone who is not necessarily invested in the story or the people, right? This is different than someone who's super energized or like, I want the story to keep moving, but they keep drawing attention to themselves. This is someone who's like, I don't even want the story. If we're not talking about me, if we're not doing something where I'm having fun right now, I don't care what everyone else is thinking right now. I want to have fun. If I'm not having fun, this is stupid, right? This is your spotlight seeker. They're difficult to redirect because they are very often unable to kind of self-reflect. They can't just take that moment to say, how are your behaviors affecting others around you? So I think this is an important moment to kind of stop and pause for a second here. How many of you are familiar with a process called collaborative problem solving? Have you heard of it before? What's that?
Ross Green?
Yes, Ross Green, yeah. If you haven't read Ross Green's books, they're really worth reading, especially teachers. This is a good one for you. Cloud problem solving takes this understanding. We're trying to change the concept of people do well when they want to people do well when they can. And the reason people do well when they can is because we all have skills that we use to address problems that occur. If we are lagging in the skills, if we're missing some of those skills, then that's going to result in an adaptive behavior. We don't use the word maladaptive because we're not saying that it's a bad behavior. We're saying you've tried to solve a problem, but it's resulted in a behavior that is causing trouble for everyone else around you or for yourself, right? It's not a great adaptation, but you did adapt. You did something. Perfect example of this. My now 8-year-old, when she was 5 and 6 years old, she's my early riser. She's got her dad's ADHD. She did inherit that from me. So when she goes to sleep, she's out cold all night long, and then as soon as 6 o'clock hits, bam, she's on. I mean, she's just like ready to go. But she's always starving first thing in the morning. She's just like, I'm hungry, I need food first thing in the morning. It's a big deal. For a while, she's going through this phase of waking up at like 5 in the morning, coming and waking me up to get her a bowl of cereal. And I was like, well, I cannot handle this anymore, right? Because I'd be up all night with her younger sister, who was very young at the time. And so I taught her how to pour herself a bowl of cereal. You can pour a bowl of cereal. You can handle this, right? I can handle this, no problem. Teach her how to do that. Problem solved, right? She comes in, no longer, I'm great. Until a few days later, after teaching this, I get a punch in the nose at 4:30 in the morning. Dad, I'm hungry. And I'm like, what just happened? Punch me in the nose. I thought you could make cereal. What's going on? Luckily in that moment, I don't know if I was just like, had superpowers at the time or what was going on. I didn't explode at her at that moment. I just said, okay, you just punched me in the nose. What's going on? Like, she was like, I'm really hungry. I'm like, okay, but I taught you how to get cereal. She's like, I know, but I'm having trouble. I'm like, okay, what's going on? She's like, I can't leave the milk. Dumb dad, right? I'd gone and taught her how to do all this stuff. Forgot that when you have an entirely new gallon of milk, she's 6 years old and couldn't lift it herself. She went into it, and got everything perfectly done. She put the bowl on the floor, she filled it up with cereal, she had everything ready to go. She went to the freezer or the fridge, found milk. She got it on the floor, but she was smart enough to realize, if I try to pour this, I will spill it, and Dad will be unhappy with me spilling milk. So she solved the problem. She went and got me to get the milk, right? It's actually pretty smart of her. I was really pleased that she didn't spill the milk. Now, punching me in the nose was not the right thing, but she was like, I didn't know if, I thought I had to be strong because I didn't know if you would believe me. I was like, if you can't lift something, I will absolutely get up and help you. Like, that is okay. And she understood enough that she didn't know what to do, but she didn't quite know how to wake me up in a good way. So we worked on, if you need to wake me up because you can't do something, that's fine, you can do that, right? So it's like learning those skills so that she can, now she can get up and make her own breakfast. Although lately she's really been in pancakes and she can't do that anymore, so now it's back to that way at 6 a.m., but that one's okay because I like it now. But you get the point, right? Like if I have a skill, if I'm missing a skill and I run into a problem that needs that skill, it's going to result in a challenging behavior, okay? This is just the last thing. So when we think about Spotlight Seeker, what are the cognitive skills that you would need to successfully navigate some of the problems that Spotlight Seeker doesn't have? Well, for one, it's perspective taking. Not very good at looking at other people's views on things. This is also someone who really struggles with like black and white thinking, right? The kind of thing, what has to be done this way, right? What are some other skills you can think of that maybe would be important cognitive skills that maybe a Spotlight Seeker wouldn't have?
Perspective in terms of empathy and how their actions affect everyone else in the group.
Yes.
If there's anyone else there playing.
Yes. How do my actions affect other people? And do I care about the feelings of other people, right? Empathy is a big skill, separate from perspective. Also on top of that is the idea of consequence, choice of consequence, right? If I do this thing, what are the likely outcomes? Sometimes people don't think about the likely outcomes of what we'll do. It's kind of like, I want to do this thing. Or they'll think, I'm going to do this thing and this will be the outcome, right? I'll do this amazing thing and everyone will look at me and think I'm awesome or I'm super funny, right? Spotlight Seekers often have that idea. I want people to look at me because I feel insecure. If they look at me, I'll feel more secure because they're paying attention. But really it doesn't work. It never works. They draw a lot of negative attention and it makes it feel worse. So Spotlight Seeking is a big challenge. You have to really understand that when you run into Spotlight Seeking, the big thing to do is you don't just take the spotlight off and just say, okay, Johnny, you need to be quiet. No one else is trying to turn the talk. You say, Johnny, you have a lot of trouble, it looks like, letting some other people talk. What's going on here? Like I've noticed you've interrupted 3 times now. You seem really excited to say something. What's going on? right? Like you pause and kind of work through that. Now, this might need to be done outside of group or inside group. Generally speaking, I say start with it outside of group. Pause with the kid in a private moment, corner somewhere, and be like, okay, so I'm noticing this happening. I just want to make sure if you're aware of that. Did you notice that you interrupted people? Did you notice? Sometimes they didn't even notice that they interrupted people. And some of my worst spotlight seekers that I thought were going to be the worst to deal with, I just a 2-minute aside after therapy, I was like, hey, did you notice this? Oh no, I didn't notice that. What are you trying to accomplish? Well, I just really want people to like me. Okay, can I give you a clue? Yeah. Give them a chance to make their choices too. They'll love playing with you more. Okay, cool, I'll try that next week. It solves a lot of problems. Just a simple aside, a huge help in this room. Okay, the separatist. The separatist is someone who really likes to, they're like the spotlight seeker in the sense that they're threatening group cohesion, more about themselves than about the group as a whole. But they're very story invested. So the spotlight seeker is not story invested, the separatist is very story invested. And they're very often self-story invested. The backstory is the most important thing to this person. And acting out their character for that backstory is often very important. This reminds me of, I think it was Jeff was talking this morning. He talked about this idea of like, you know, for a long time his DM noticed you're playing a lot of villain-like characters. Why don't you play a hero? Right? And I don't know what it is, but whenever I run into a separatist, they like to play the anti-heroes. They love to play these kind of like misunderstood, vigilante kind of heroes, right? And I will admit, so this is like awareness of bias time, right? I'm a white male Christian, very conservative kind of person, right? So I've got a lot of my own biases and things that come up, and so I'm very, when it comes to playing a character, I don't like playing bad guys. I'm not the kind of guy that's like, I'm going to play a dark evil wizard that does evil things. Like, that is not fun to me. So for a long time when I was playing this game, I really didn't understand the kids who wanted to play the anti-hero. I saw no attraction to that. But separatists love it. And I've come to understand it better, right? There's this concept like, you feel like the world's against you, so I'm going to kick back just as hard, right? And there's that aspect of it. You can be a part of that separatist. I'm after the world. And what a separatist requires is not correction and deviation. It's empathy and understanding. I need to understand why you feel the way you feel. And I love what was addressed this morning when Jeffrey was talking about. His DM said, you're always playing these villains. Why don't you try playing the just like giving him a challenge. Separatists love challenges. They're not, again, they're engaged in story. Give them a challenge. And he's like, why don't you try playing a hero? See what you think about it. Okay, we're gonna try that. And he says it changed his whole outlook. He suddenly realized he wanted to help people. He became a much more helping kind of person. Too much so that it actually led him into a career of helping people. Right? So separatists love a challenge. They love to be challenged, but they don't really do a good job of seeing how others fit into that equation. Right? And people like me really struggle with the separatists, right? This is like your lawful good leader types. They will not like the separatists, and that's where you're gonna see a lot of conflict, right? So I had to learn that about myself and learn to kind of like let go of some of that and let people be a little bit edgy. It's okay to be a little bit edgy. It's not bad. You just have to understand why they're doing it. Story time. So I had a group of adults. This is my adult group. They were how do I put this? That sounds rich, the story. Essentially, like, they were running an operation of trying to find an enemy group of elves that were trying to start a war, right? So this cell of agents had come in to create a false narrative to create a reason for a war. And that ultimately resulted in them bringing a big steamship into this harbor. And they loaded it with a bunch of explosives, and they were gonna, after they did their diplomatic mission of peace and doing all these wonderful things, they were going to sail the ship out into this ocean a little ways, secretly unload it, and then explode the ship to make it look like they'd been attacked. And now, because they were trying to be peaceful, but the positive character's country had attacked them, they could start a war, right? Well, the characters didn't know this yet. They were just at the very beginning phases of this story. And the ship had arrived in the harbor. Now, we had a group of about 5 or 6 players, and one kid in here was very much the separatist. His name was Damon the Vampire. Right? He was Damon the half-elf vampire, that's what he was. And he just had this edgy kind of quality he wanted to be. Like, he was always kind of doing just slightly bad enough things that the group couldn't really get away with doing all good things, right? Like, he'd steal a lot of stuff. Because the group, for the most part, was trying to be like a positive group of heroes. Like, they were really trying to be like your quintessential archetype heroes, which is fine, right? But the separatist kid was like, no, I want to be edgy, I want to be dark, I want to be different. And so he was always trying to like look for some way to kind of undo the plans of the rest of the group in many, many ways. Well, it all came to a head when they got onto the ship. They knew they had to sneak on the ship because they'd been given a mission to sneak on and see what's really going on because it seemed odd about the ship. So they snuck on to do their diplomatic or their espionage stuff. But, you know, being that none of them are very good at subtlety in real life, they kind of just walked right onto the ship. They didn't really do anything subtle. And so everyone knew they were on the ship. But like I gave them a reason to kind of be given a tour of the ship. Like, okay, we'll give you a tour of the ship, that's fine. So they kind of went on knowing that they were on it. Well, Damon the vampire managed to sneak away from the rest of the group, as he often did. He often did his own little subplot mission that he had in mind. They always split apart. And so he found this quiet part, and he said, I'm going to start planting explosives on the ship. And everyone was like, why? He's like, because I don't like elves. My character doesn't like elves. Yeah, but why are you can start a war if you do this. Like, we're in tensions with this country already. Why are you doing this? Don't do that. But, and I told him, like, well, you're not with him, so you can't just tell him no. Your character can't tell him no because they're not there. Well, I go find him. You didn't notice that he left because he had rolled a successful sneak check. So we have to deal with this, right? We have to figure out how to handle this. If you can come up with a good reason why you would notice Damon was gone, then let me know, right? So I'm letting this play out. Damon didn't realize that he had planted explosives exactly where I had hidden explosives on the ship. So it's effectively just tripled the amount of explosives hidden on the ship. And he put it right next to the boiler, the big steam engine, and everything. So he got all ready to go. He said, I'm going to light the fuse as everyone's getting off. I'm ready to light the fuse. I said, while you're on the boat? He goes, yeah. I'm like, you sure you want to do that one? Like, he hadn't learned the telltale when your DM says, are you sure? You pause and rethink. He goes, yeah, I'm sure. I'm like, okay. Now in Lorem, we simplify some of the skills. We do what's called a dice match system. So if you're trying to survive, like for example, like if you had to run away really fast, you do it instead of like a survival check with a d20. I would say, okay, take your survival skills, and you can level up what level of survival you have, or athleticism, whatever. And then you have to match a randomly generated number. So I match number. Now, if you run into something that's really hard, you might have to match more than once, right? If it's nearly impossible, you have to match 6 times. So I was like, in the middle of the ship, you just set off a short fuse set of explosions, and you're trying to run off the ship from you. You're going to have to match 6 times. And he's like, oh. Is this a problem? I'm like, yeah, it's a problem. You're blowing up a ship here in the middle and you're trying to run away. So, only time in history I've done this, he matched all 6 times. It was unbelievable. I mean, at that point, everyone at the table was like, okay, I don't care that this is bad what you did. That was pretty amazing, right? But he still, I was like, you can't get away with this without a consequence. Like, you might not let him just get away. So I was like, you managed to make a ship, the ship explodes, and you are flying through the air now. I'm like, realistically, this thing has to go off. So I'm like, you fly through the air. And I rolled a few times to have him attack. He was already pretty low on health, so now he's down to 0 health. And he's laying there bleeding to death, essentially, on the set. But he just made this ship explode that had now, because there was like hundreds of people gathered around the ship for diplomatic reasons, had become a terrorist attack, essentially, right? This ship exploded and killed hundreds of people. There's casualties all over the place. Made a huge problem for everyone else. And the whole group is looking at Damon, like you could feel the tension, or you could cut it with a knife. They're all just looking at him like, what did you just do? And I watched him kind of like this in his chair. Just sinks lower and lower in his chair as I'm describing the carnage of what's happened, you know, and I said, so your character has to come on shore. I watched him on shore and you've got no hearts left. Now in my game, you don't do death saves. Other people have to roll the save. So it's a first aid rather than a death save. You're dying, so someone else has to help you. So everyone on the table seriously debated whether or not they were going to help him. They all sat there as their characters, looking at his dying body, and debating, do we even try to rescue him? And he was just like, guys, why wouldn't you? They're like, you've done nothing but cause problems for us, man. Okay, I don't know what to do here, right? So ultimately, they were a group of heroes, and they said, we gotta do the right thing. The right thing is, someone's dying, we gotta help them. So they did their first aid rolls, they succeeded, he survived, and we ended the session there. We couldn't go any further. I was like, whew, that is quite a lot of tension to leave off on. So we come back, fast forward a week later, we come back in, the whole group comes together, and before we get started, one of our players of the heroes takes on the leadership role, and he says, we need to talk about last week. And everyone goes, yeah, we do. We pause for a second, I said, okay, what do you guys want to talk about? So we pause in that moment, and And he turns to the player. He says, "You know I like you. I'm going to be talking to you as my character, not as me. I like you. I think you're great. But our characters need to have a talk." And I loved that setup. It created that aesthetic distance. Because in reality, he was still annoyed with the player too. Like, you keep doing stuff to mess up our game, man. Knock it off. This is really what's going on here. But he did such a beautiful job of reframing it, saying, our characters have something to talk about. And that set a good frame for the whole group, because they were just role-playing. Basically, it was like, if you've ever watched like Big Brother or whatever, like everyone's in the same apartment, it was like one of those moments. They had a house that they had bought together, so everyone's sitting in the living room having this discussion with the vampire, having an intervention around his terroristic tendencies, you know? Only in fantasy role-playing can you have those kind of interventions. So they're sitting having this discussion, and they're sharing what they're feeling about it. And he's sitting there like, okay, I'm hearing it. Like, and to the separatists, every living credit, he sat and listened for whatever reason that day. He'd never listened to feedback before, but he had it this time. And it was great. They gave him such good feedback that ultimately he sat back and thought, well, how do I help this character reform? And he said, I don't think my character can reform. I think I've written it into such a hole that he would not change. And so that he did his own little thing. He says, I go up to my room and I write a letter. And he wrote a letter. He literally wrote a letter there in the group and read it to the group. And it was basically like this apology letter for everything. He says, and I'm leaving. I realize this. I've caused too much trouble for the group. I'm leaving the group. And he took off. It's the only time we had a character leave the group that wasn't dead. This was, he created a new character. Like the actual player stayed. He didn't leave the group, right? So we clarified with him to make sure. So he invented a new character. And the next character he brought in was a team player. I mean, absolute hero, great team player. Still a little bit odd. He wanted to be the odd man out. I think he just identified as being different than people, which is fine. This is a kid with autism. That makes a lot of sense to him as a human being. But he now played a character, instead of being like a separatist kind of scary bad guy kind of anti-hero, he was a paladin, what was the term? It was a troglodyte. That's what he called his character. Basically a giant bug type monster thing. And he described it in this way. So he looks different, stuck out. People didn't like him or trust him, but he was a good person. And so he changed the whole frame from being this separatist destroying everybody to I'm separate, but I'm a team player. I'm unique, and that's what he was looking for. I think that's what he ultimately found out was, I like my uniqueness. I want to be unique and different, but I also want to interact with it. He learned it. So this is an example of that. Kind of example. It's long-winded example. You can see how separatists can create problems in the game and how you can deal with them. The jester is a bigger problem in more ways than others because, again, this is someone who's not really invested emotionally in the story or the people. They're a bit like the spotlight seeker, but they're not always trying to be in the spotlight. They can be subtly creating problems. They might just do dumb things with their characters because these are the people that like to set the world on fire so they can see it burn and then laugh about it. The jester is not a funny person per se. They might occasionally be funny, but generally they're not funny. They think they're funny. And they're the person that's coming in and just purposely trying to mess up everything around them. For example, the group will enter into a test negotiation with an NPC who holds key successful information, right? And then this player shows up and says, well, I pull out my submachine gun and say hello to my little friend! And I shoot everybody in the room. Well, first off, you don't have a submachine gun. That doesn't exist here. All this detail. He's just looking to make everyone laugh if he can, or just looking to mess things up. Or everyone say, hey, we really need to help that person. So that's great. I'm going to go and kill his horse. What? Why? Because I think it's funny. Like, this is the jester. Like, they think they're funny. They think it's great. And so they create all kinds of chaos in the group. So this is something that has to be addressed pretty quickly. Jesters are by nature pretty anxious people, right? So this is not someone that you can respond to in a group and say, hey, knock it off. Because then they'll just deflate very quickly. So there's definitely someone you want to talk to outside the group, separately. Hey, what's going on with that thing that you're doing there? What's going on? Well, I was just trying to make everyone laugh. Did it work? Not really. Why don't you think it worked? Right? Like, we have to do a little one-to-one with this person. Help them kind of see, like, what are some behaviors that might work better for what you're aiming for? We really want to understand, just like the spotlight seeker, just like the separatist, what do they need? These kids need empathy. These adults need empathy. They need someone to understand what their needs are. If we can understand what their needs are, we start to build the skills that they lag in, and now they can be more successful. So I've got a problem. I don't have the skills to deal with it, so I set the world on fire, right? Well, if I can identify what that gesture's problem is, identify what the possible lagging skills are, I can help him build those skills, and he can help me come up with a solution that will still meet the group's expectations and solve his problems. It's a collaborative problem solving, right? It's just figuring that issue out. Generally speaking, you can redirect gestures in a moment, like if they get really goofy, like you can say, hey, let's pause on that, let's rethink how we're doing this, what do you think, let's do it for everyone else? Or you might say, is that really what your character is doing? And they go, oh, no, I'm just kidding. Right? They'll back off pretty quick, right? Like they say, oh yeah, I'm gonna go kill that guy's horse. Is that really what you want to do? No, I was just teasing. I just thought it'd be funny to say out loud. Okay, because when you say it out loud, like I might just let your character go do that. And sometimes I teach the gestures by just letting it happen, right? They might say, oh, I'm gonna go and steal that guy's wallet. And everyone's like, don't do that. I'm like, okay, roll to steal. And he's like, really? I'm like, yeah. He rolls it, and then I have him get caught. Right? So gestures are still sort of invested in the story. They're kind of in and out of the story. They're really more invested in just feeling comfortable. If they feel comfortable, gestures are usually not a big issue. Okay? So generally speaking, it's someone who's uncomfortable and deals with it by being silly and outrageous. Questions about that? Last of the groups here is the followers. Now this seems kind of interesting when you put, why do we have a follower as the challenging one? Because the followers are quiet. They don't disrupt the group. They rarely cause conflict. They are generally pretty likable people, right? But the follower is a challenge for what is essentially inaction. This is someone who just kind of does what everyone else does. They are the absolute vanilla yogurt of group, if you will. I'm going to be just so neutral that I can fit in everywhere. This is like the harmonizer gone wrong, right? The follower. Because the follower just fit in. Whatever everyone else wants to do, I'll do it. If that makes you happy, I'll do it. No worries. Your codependent personality types, pretty strong followers in these kinds of aspects, right? As long as you need me, I'll do what you need me to do, right? There's that aspect of it. You have to really be careful with the followers because, again, they're hard to spot. They're generally more introverted. So it might just be someone you might spot someone who's just more quiet, doesn't really engage strongly all the time as a follower, and really they're not. They might actually just be more quiet. And I just happen to agree with everyone's doing. That's cool with me. So you sometimes have to check and say, are you going along with this just because, or do you really agree? No, I really agree. This is great. I just didn't feel like there's anything I could add to the conversation. Okay, we'd love to hear your input. Like, let us know, right? So you've got to watch carefully for them because, again, they rarely speak out and they seem to do whatever the majority says they'll do. And so you want to encourage them to share their thoughts on them. This is someone that we do address more often in the context of group. Not by putting a spotlight on saying, hey, you haven't said anything for a while. Why are you just doing what everyone else says, right? You're going to look at them and say, what is it that your character would do here? I'm kind of curious what your character's thinking right now. Oh, I don't know what my character's thinking. Well, take a minute and think about what your character might think right now. Like, so you can keep a little distance, put it in the context of their character, and allow them to try and share their opinion that way. A good example of a follower, I have a young girl who created a character called Chi-Chi. Chi-Chi the fairy. Chi-Chi was 3 feet tall. She had a fire mace that was as tall as her. She was super strong, had lost the ability to fly because of a tragic accident with a combine harvester. I don't know what the accident was. In the other context where that was the story. She had lost her wings in the combat in a tragic combine harvester accident. And she wasn't even a farmer. I asked, are you a farmer? No. Oh, okay. So Chi-Chi was one of the people, she couldn't make decisions for herself. She would often get into analysis paralysis, right? We have a bunch of choices of what you're going to do. We have 3 side quests, she can go on, all these different things they can do. She's like, I'll do what everyone else wants to do. I'll do what everyone else wants to do. I don't want to do it. And I finally kind of got this point, I was like, the way she describes Chi-Chi, the person, and I said that I'll change the name of the player, not that any of you would know this girl from Oregon. We'll say Rebecca. Rebecca had the character Chi-Chi. Rebecca, like I looked at her like, she's very anxious, she's upset. But the way she described Chi-Chi did not fit with what was happening. She was saying Chi-Chi is a 3 foot tall firebrand of a character. She loves interacting with people. She's brave. She fights first and asks questions later. She is the kind of fairy that will like go up and punch a cave troll in the throat without even questioning if it was a good idea. Like, this is how she described the backstory of this character. And that is not how she was playing the character. She was just basically going with whatever the group said. So we had a follower situation. I was like, okay, that's a good clue. A good clue that you got a follower is their backstory doesn't match their behavior. So I turned and I said, I have a question. What would Chi-Chi do? And she stopped, like Rebecca stopped, looked at me, and she goes, what do you mean? I said, well, in this situation, I think I know what Rebecca is doing. But what would Chi-Chi do? I don't know. She spent the rest of the group not interacting with anyone. She just sat there literally writing in her journal. I was like, are you cool? She's like, I'm good, I just want to write. Okay, she's like, I'm still thinking about your question. Okay. Like, she just chose to step back. We can allow that for her. She would jump in where she needed to occasionally. The next week, she goes back for group, and she sits down, she goes, I have to tell you what we did this week. We always do a check-in at the beginning of our group sessions. So tell me what you did this week. She goes, well, we had a new science class. I had started a new semester. And I walked in, and all of the I was late, and all the chairs were taken except for one at the very back and one at the front next to two people I didn't know. And I was like, oh, okay, what would you do? She goes, I walked in, the first thing that came to my head was, what would Chi-Chi do? So I went to the front of the room, and I sat down next to those two kids and said, hi, I'm Rebecca. Who are you? And everyone in the room was like, what? Like, it was so great. We had a chance to just applaud her and say, good work, you know? And she started using that, what would Chi-Chi do, in every situation that she couldn't make a decision or whatever it was. And it was great because pretty soon, like, it became like almost a group mantra. Like, she went from this follow along to the firebrand of the character she created, because we got to a situation and I described the situation and the whole group would go, what would Chi-Chi do? And she's like, I'll tell you what Chi-Chi would do. She'd walk right up to that thing and hit it in the face with her mace hand. And everyone was like, yeah, I get so excited. And it was great. Like, it just totally brought her out of her shell. And it applied in real life, and it applied in the game. And it was just, it was one of those really gratifying, you don't get these all the time, but it was a really gratifying, blossoming moment to see this happen with a character. So, I mean, this is the aspect of the challenging. I don't want you to think that when we have these challenging behaviors, these challenging player roles, that they're impossible to deal with. Like, they absolutely are possible. You just have to use your supreme, awesome, powerful skills to navigate those challenging behaviors with them. Help them feel that empathy. We're doing on time. We got to oh no, we have till 5, right? Yep. Okay, good. We're good at that. So here's some strategies for leading. Wow, look at that. Leading, whatever. I have this self-confession here. I did this on a Google slide earlier, and I didn't like how it was looking. And then one of the earlier ladies showed her presentation, showed how she used Canva, and I have Canva, and I was like, I'm going to redo all my slides. So I literally just spent lunchtime redoing all my slides. So, I mean, it wasn't hard to do, but I was like, I like this slide. But as you can see, I got some spelling mistakes. So the strategies for leading these tabletop role-playing games in therapy, and I want you to think about it in terms of how we work with these groups. And then I'm going to give you a little bit of a breakout session for a second, give you some challenges. All right, so we have session 0. That's very important. Always make sure you know what the expectations of where we're going from. Balanced participation. Develop a knack for having moments for each player to shine in the story. So understanding who your characters are, what their skills may be is really important. Managing the resources. In other words, having the tools to streamline play. So encouraging things like maps, tokens, handouts, preparing these things well in advance. Have your dungeons planned out. Don't just like randomly draw them figured out. Because you're not going to be able to deal with the dynamics that come up with the different roles the players come if you're sitting there struggling how to run the game. You got to know how to run the game. Otherwise, these player dynamics will just steamroll you. The next thing is don't wait to address the conflict. Stop it right there immediately, right? It's just like the descriptions in there. I don't know. I'm saying this as if we were all in the same presentation I was just doing with Jack. But this idea of like you put the pause button on, you reframe what's going on, you talk about it, you discuss it, and you move forward from that conflict or whatever. You immediately address it, right? This is not just games. This is the work of our education, therapy, and all that kind of stuff. Finally, seek feedback. Ask your players what's working, what's not working. Don't be afraid at the end of sessions to say, hey, what did you guys like? What's something you like? What's something that could have been better about the story? What's missing from this story that you would love to see there? What's missing from group that you feel like could really help this group get along better, right? And then they can actually be open to each other. Well, I feel like we need to talk more. Or I feel like we don't do enough dungeon crawling. I'd really like to go fight some more monsters. We do too much role playing. Yeah, I agree. Everyone has a chance to kind of see what they want. They can tailor it to what their needs would be, right? And then just keep learning. Follow other game masters. Learn this different storytelling techniques. Learn the different things you're doing here today. Like, this is what you're doing great. Okay? All right, before I go to any questions, I want to do a quick little breakout. So what we're going to do is we're going to separate, let's just do, looks like we can pause it too. So let's have like you two, you two, and you two. I'm going to give you a second. So I'm going to give you all a scenario. And then I want you to kind of describe what you think you might do to help in this scenario. So we're going to come back here to our challenge. So we have a group. We're gonna imagine we've had a group running. It's just an after-school kind of group. It's a D&D club. We're essentially just playing, and it's a D&D club for social skills. So it's not just anyone who wants to show up. Like, these are people who have been identified and they recommend it, and they are coming because they like these kinds of games and stuff, but they're also going to need that social skill learning. So you've been put in charge to help run these groups, and you're in charge of helping keep the story going and all that kind of stuff. You're going to have the following challenges. You've got one player who really is the spotlight seeker, is just looking for all the attention. They're constantly showboating, they're constantly going through all their different challenges and saying, okay, here's that person who's just looking for the attention of the room. You have another person who's the jester. Okay, I'm going to give you two people. Jester, they're invested in the story. The jester does care about the story, but they tend to just find every moment they can to joke about it. They're always trying to make things more silly, and the rest of the group seems to really want it to be a little bit more serious, right? So that jester seems uncomfortable with the seriousness of the group and keeps making it silly, and that's making everyone else very uncomfortable. Okay, those are your two big challenges. You have one who's kind of looking for the spotlight, and they kind of think of this. I forgot to add this, but the spotlight seeker kind of thinks of themselves as the leader. So they are invested in the story. I'm going to give you that aspect. The spotlight seeker is invested in the story, but they think of themselves as the leaders. So it's always like, well, okay, I'm going to take the lead here, guys. This is what we're going to do. And they're just kind of directing everybody, and it's usually about helping their character look the best. Okay. All right. So take a second, talk it over. How would you address one or both of these? You can pick whichever one sounds best to you. Take a few minutes here. Address how you do it, and then we're going to come back here and we're going to talk a little bit about it as a group. So turn around and take that minute to discuss.
Good vision. I feel like what's your groundbreaking solution?
I was listening in. You guys have some really cool ideas. I like some of these. So, is there anyone that would be willing to kind of share some things that you thought, some things that you came up with, like, yeah, this would be really useful, or we thought we could use this? Like, who would like to share some of the ideas? Mike?
Yeah, go for it. So I was running a group one time. They had a spotlight seeker. This guy was the leader of the party, and whenever people didn't agree with him, his character would grab him and slap him or throttle him. And,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
yeah. And so the other people in the group were kind of getting a little frustrated by it. So me and my facilitator, we created a rifle party. And if anybody's seen Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog,
Yeah.
Captain Ham. I brought in Captain Ham. So Nathan Fillion was the paladin in this other group, and he, oh, that's something you're interested. Yes, that would be wonderful. Oh, I'm sorry, I've already taken it off. But you're right, you would have really loved it. Slap. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought that was the way you greeted people. No, my mistake. And so it really bothered him, and he was like flabbergasted, like, whoa, what do I do? And the rest of the group thought it was kind of funny because he was put in this place. But then, we're gonna try and steal this MacGuffin or whatever. Oh, that's a great idea. Here's my plan. I'll see you there. And it was always like one step ahead. And so it eventually brought this group that he had been trying to bully. They like rallied around him about like this other dude is really annoying. We gotta.
Interesting. I like that. That's pretty clever. So create a archetype to the extreme of that person that now becomes group cohesion around addressing the different problems. Okay, any other ideas that came up? Probably similar ones. I don't know.
We had a similar one, but also looking at creating a situation where the spotlight seeker is unable to interact with the rest of the party, and it would require them to team without them, kind of making them have to sit and wait for the outcome of things for at least a period of time to kind of see how things go without their influence.
Yeah, I like that. So have them sit with it for a little bit longer. That's great. Can I pick on you guys for a second? Austin, I think you were saying something about how to use the other characters or creating situations with NPCs as well. I kind of like. I can't remember exactly what you said now.
Yeah, we were talking about like if something's going wrong with the party, like they bundle a mission, or it's like they're like fighting a dragon, I have the village to fight. Like I don't like to set things up for you to fail, but it is like you have this sort of like spotlight person and this jester both like detracting from like strategy and plans, like and you have to fight a dragon. It's probably not gonna go great.
Yeah.
And it's probably very easy to set up for like, if they surprise me, work with the team, this will go great. And if they usually do, some houses are going to get destroyed by this dragon. And so now there's like, you know, the village mayor, whatever's like, so who's in charge and why is half my village destroyed?
See, that makes me, I love that because it makes me think of like the Hobbit movie. They got the dragon out of the fortress. Oh no, now it's Texan. Right? Like, brilliant. I like that. And then you said something too, Jan. You said, oh, you could have an NPC show up or something and say, so who's the leader? Like just ask them and see if it builds up the group dynamic conversation right there. So I love, all of you had some really good thoughts here, some good ideas. Did you have a chance to talk a little bit about gesture, what you do with gesture?
Yeah, I mentioned like I could even be game thing. Like let's say we're playing a serious game and they're always like they're always trying to do traps. Like I don't know, like if we had a session 0 and they thought about all this stuff doing this, it's like especially doing the social things, like something new going on, is something for the last two cool, like, is there something outside of like, is there something outside of this?
That is brilliant. See, I really like this. So can I tell me if I'm saying this wrong? I want to reframe here because I really like what you said. But like this idea of saying we had our session 0, right? Which means we all kind of agreed to a theme or a feel of the game, and now the gesture's not fitting in with that. Being able to help and say, hey, go back to session 0. We were talking about having kind of this feel to the game, but I'm noticing that's not working for you. What's going on? Are you doing okay? Is there things going on that we need to talk about? That's brilliant. That was such a good insight. Yeah. Any other thoughts about how to help a gesture at all?
Well, you mentioned the gesture was uncomfortable seriousness, so whether spotlighting his humor too much to make it too serious or make him have to own that or separate it, are you also pointing that out? He's off track and then that extra attention.
Yeah, that could be it. Any other thoughts?
Maybe Stubbs up having a situation where like trying to teach the consumer positive, like have a situation where you can use something.
Yeah.
So that we're teaching them, it's okay to be silly, we have good touch base with the socially appropriate.
Yeah. Great, yeah. Use the defense in a positive way. So when we think about psychological defenses, humor is a human, natural, mental, psychological defense. It's one of the most advanced and useful ones that exists, right? Gallows humor exists for a reason, and it's really helpful. And when I'm working with my trauma clients, I've been pretty shocked at the things I laugh about nowadays compared to when I was younger, right? Like I said, I come from a background very Christian conservative, very like straight-laced kind of guy growing up. I work with trauma, and now there's things that I laugh about that as a kid I've been like, I can't believe you laugh at that. And now I'm like cracking jokes about death and gore and all kinds of stuff because it diffuses the tension in a way. Now, I'm not saying it's okay to make lighthearted about trauma, that's not what we're talking about, but like, learning to appropriately apply the humor in doses can be very, very useful. I mean, look at the D&D movie, for example. It's got great humor that applies on a very intensely emotional plot line. Like, it's super, like, you look at it, it's like, that's intense. He's trying to save his daughter who's been kidnapped for crying out loud. And yet we have this great, funny stuff, right? I mean, even there's so much as saying, well, we'll shoot an arrow into it. What if you hit her? That's a risk we'll have to take. You know, like, it's just like this kind of stuff. Like, I love that you can reuse the humor. But, like, make it humor within the context of serious. It can totally be done. Great. You guys are doing great. So when you think about these different roles and different things that come up, I want you to kind of consider, like, there's really not one good way of doing it. I love the idea of using the NPCs to, what was the term you used? It was the narrative mirror. Thank you. I love the idea, the concept of the narrative mirror, right? Like you use an NPC to kind of reflect the player's behaviors. Very often, like what's the old adage? It's like when we see a flaw in someone, it's actually a flaw in ourselves, but it's just magnified. And I love that. I think you, let's see, it was Chad, right? Chad said along the lines of, well, yeah, but we don't want to make it so obvious, like, well, Jimmy, this character's name is Timmy, no relation. You know, like, we don't want to make it obvious, but it is useful to use that narrative mirror. Totally a wonderful skill. And that's kind of what you did with the Nathan Fillion character a little bit. I love that. So these are all really good things. So you can use the NPC. You can use the story. I love that Austin talked about letting characters fail. Like, when we fail together. And it can be, I've had sessions where it was utterly satisfying that we had a total party kill. I mean, like, they got rocked. But it was, at the end, everyone was like, that was awesome. What a way to go out, like, oh my gosh. And it was great. You know, I was like, it was the first time I got brave enough to let characters die in grief. Like, I used to think, oh, it's good to let characters die. I'm trying to help kids deal with grief. Like, I was naive and stupid then. But, you know, the idea, like, what a better way than to have everyone come around and, like, talk about how their characters died in this heroic manner fighting a dragon that they had no business fighting. And this was a case of very impulsive children who decided, well, we're going to go and do this Italian. I'm like, I don't think you guys want to do that. Like, no, we really want to. I'm like, no, you really don't want to. No, we really want to. Okay, you all get burned to a crisp and you're dead. Wait, no severe one? Like, it's a 10-story dragon, guys. What are you going to do to it? Spit on it? You can't kill it. That was not the point of this battle. Oh. And I was like, okay. And I let it happen, and they had to rewrite characters. And it ended up being really positive. And they were a lot more careful after that. Another good example of that is I had a group that, we had one kid, super impulsive. I called him my impulsive soldier. Because his role was a soldier. Going into every fight, he'd just go in guns blazing and just everything, like balls to the wall, excuse my language here, just full bore all the time, right? That's what he did. But I just started setting traps for him. And they were like, sometimes they were the most obvious cartoony trap. You would even, like I said, you walk into a room and there's a pedestal with a golden idol, and above it is a rope that's fraying slightly and a sword with a 10,000-pound anvil hanging over it. I go get the idol. Like, I mean, it was that obvious sometimes. And so I just called them my impulsive soldier traps. And they were ridiculous. And finally, one time I gave him this rod of resurrection where he could touch skeletons and they'd pop into existence. He could control the skeleton. And I had an impulsive soldier trap. I had him go to a room. It's a big room. I said, you look into a room, there's a box of treasure at the center. It's open. There's a lot of treasure inside of it. You look at the ceiling and you can see holes in the ceiling. And you see hinges at the corner of all the rooms. You guys know where this is going, right? The room will come down, spikes will descend, and you're dead. He goes, I'm going to get the treasure. And everyone at the table's like, okay, there we go again. New character for him again. And he goes, wait. I'm going to use my skeleton to go in and get the thing. And everyone was like, oh, did you do it? So the skeleton goes in, grabs treasure, the room slightly collapses and kills the skeleton. He goes, yeah, I thought that might happen. I'm like, and you made someone else, wait, you thought that might happen? Well, yeah. I just figured out I wanted the treasure really bad though, but I couldn't think of another way to do it. But then I thought of another way. I'm like, so wait, all these other times you knew the trap would get you? Yeah. I just couldn't think of another way. And I'm like, well, why did it make a difference? He goes, well, I practiced a lot now. And I'm like, oh, so by letting you fail 500 times, you've learned how to not fail. Like, that was a really cool moment for me too, because I was like, I was actually kind of feeling cruel almost, like this poor kid does not see traps. And I didn't realize that he really did understand the trap. He just couldn't think of a way around it. It literally no skills now. So you can think about this, right? This is impulsivity that gets turned on its head and becomes a really powerful part of the game. And that was something everyone in the group loved talking about for weeks, was that he had learned how to solve the problems. All right. Well, do you guys have any questions before as we wrap up now? Any things you want to share or ideas that we didn't get to hear? Or any questions now? All right. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate all this help to you. If you have time and you're not like scheduled for other games like crazy over the next few days, I would really encourage you to come and try out Legends of Lorem. You can get on the event things, Legends of Lorem Moonlighting. I'm totally being shameless here and plugging, but I need feedback. I'd love to get some like insight as to what kind of things that really work well and how to focus. I want this game to be the best it can make it. So I would love to have everybody. You guys have been good at it today. Thank you very much for all your time. Thank you.